How you doing? This is Coach DeCarlo. As you see, I'm in a different area. Some work is being done around the house, so I've been sent to the basement, as it were. So, hey, we'll work here, and we'll go on and talk about the message this morning. Well, I guess this afternoon. Somebody had asked about, demons and things like that, and, other people have talked about facing challenges and so forth and dealing with like loved ones and talking about the promise and so forth. So I want to talk about the person of Jesus and his testing in the wilderness. I know that many of us know about the movie The Last Temptation of Christ, but I want to talk about the first temptations of Christ and how it applies to us. And again, when we're talking about Christ, we're talking about the I am within. So as I state often, and I want to repeat again today, from Genesis to Revelation, this is your story. So let's go on and get started. It says that Jesus was tested in the wilderness, and forgive me, I'm going to look away so I can read this so that you can get the full benefit of it. Jesus was led by the Spirit in the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and nights, he was hungry, and the tempter came and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus answered and said, "It is written that man should not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God." The tempter, the devil, took him to a holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple and said, "If you are the Son of God, then throw yourself down, for it is written that he will command his angels concerning you, that your foot doesn't strike the ground," in essence. Then again, Jesus answered and said, "It is written, do not put lower God to the test." So then we go to the last temptation, and the devil says to him, he took him to the highest mountain and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their splendor. And he said, "All of this will I give to you if you bow down and worship me." And so Jesus said, "Get thee from me, Satan, for it is written that thou shalt worship the Lord thy God alone." And, of course, then the devil left him. Now, in hearing that, and we heard this in Sunday school and everything else, what does this have to do with us? And how does this apply to us? Well, first and foremost, we find that it says that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Many of us are occupying a wilderness. And, many people say that, you shouldn't come into hardship and things like that. But that's just not life. Life happens like that. The thing is what we do when we're in the wilderness, when things seem to be dry, when abundance doesn't seem to come, when our health seems to be fading, when we're lacking relationships and supporting people around us. In the wilderness, we're tempted, and I remember my former pastor, one of my former pastors, his name was Charles Stanley, and he used this acronym, HALT. And HALT simply meant, don't allow yourself to get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, or too tired, because then you open yourself up to all these other distractions. And so somebody would often say, and I think it's Mr. Lindell, get to a place where you're content, comfortable where you're at, because if you start, wanting too much, then you get distracted. And it's not anything wrong with wanting abundance, a loving relationship, better health. None of these things are wrong. But in pursuing them, don't let the pursuit become, as it were, the worship of these things. And that's why Scripture says, for the love of money is the root of many kinds of evil. When we start just focusing on the thing, forgetting that we're the creators of these things, that we can lose sight of who it is that we are. And so then we start worshiping the things without and missing the divine within. But so 40 days, 40 in the Bible is always symbolic of testing. We saw that the children of Israel were in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus, again, he also experienced the testing for 40 days. So 40 always symbolizes testing. A lot of times before your breakthrough, you may have this period of testing. So And it may not necessarily be 40 days. Sometimes it can be less, sometimes it can be longer. But it's just your moment in the wilderness. But don't see that as the end. You know, I talked to several people, and they're going through a moment of testing because they know that they should be in another place. But as you're occupying the wilderness, rejoice in the wilderness. Learn to discover the oasis within your wilderness. And when the promised land opens up, you'll be prepared. And that's what happened with the children of Israel. Once they left the 40 years in the wilderness, they were prepared to take the land. You must be prepared to take what Spirit God is offering you. But if you're not equipping yourself in the times in the wilderness, then you're going to find yourself ill-prepared when you enter in the promised land. You know, and I can tell you of many stories, but one of the people, you know, besides Michael Bajor, the hair care, Paul Mitchell, or Tyler Perry, many of these people spent time in the wilderness. You know, Morgan Freeman, Samuel Jackson's careers really didn't blow up until about after 50. So a lot of times we're tested prior to us entering into the promise, because if we're ill-equipped, what happens when we enter into the promise, we want to go back to the land of Egypt because it seems too hard. You know, but when you occupy from a place of authority because you've been through the wilderness, you say, listen, I have my battle stripes. I've been through this. I can tell you what to expect, you know, and don't think it's strange when everything sometimes doesn't seem like it's working out, or just before your blessing, you know, it seems like everything is going awry. So the 40 years in the wilderness is needful, and I say 40 years, it could be 40 days, it could be 10 days, whatever your duration in the wilderness is prepping you for the promise. So don't be discouraged, continue to live from the end. So he says, Jesus was in the wilderness, and Jesus says, you know, turn these stones to bread. So what he wanted to do was captivate Jesus' lust of the body. And a lot of times that's what we get. Sometimes we know that there's a promise of a relationship, of better health, or of financial blessings. And we're tempted by the shortcut. And the shortcut says, you know, go on and eat now, and, you know, just worry about the consequences later. And then you get into a relationship that's, you know, that you shouldn't have gotten into, that it wasn't beneficial to you, or you acquired money in a way that didn't agree with your spirit, or you started these poor health habits. You know, you try to go around or bypass what it is that the divine spirit has shown you, you know, when he had shown you the promise of whatever that promise was to you in the high place. You know, we try to bypass it and take another direction, and then we say, why is this happening to me? Why is this going on now? You know, what did I do to deserve this? And a lot of times, creators, you got to look to your thoughts and what it was that was shown to you, because a lot of times we get off path. We all do. The thing is not to stay there. And even with the children of Israel, they got off path, and it cost them 40 years in the wilderness. But when they came out, they were soldiers that were ready to take and occupy the land. So don't be tempted by the bypass, you know, the immediate gratification, as it were. And yes, you can do that, but also then own the consequences of your actions. Many times we want to do, as it were, or take these actions, or do this, or welcome somebody into our life that we know that may not be beneficial to us. And then we say, well, why is this happening to me? You have to also, if you're going to manifest it, you also have to own it. And so whatever owning that looks like, you got to own the consequences and say, I am that. And if I want to change, then simply change your mind, change your world, change the situation. So again, but always begin by looking within, because you created that, whatever that situation is. We may not want to own that, but until we own it, we always give our power away to the gods outside, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But anytime you say that it's someone else's fault, and you don't take personal ownership for your world of experiencing, then you're giving your power away. Jesus didn't give his power away. He says, it is written that man shall not live by the desires of the flesh alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And the word is, as you think you are, be it unto you according to your faith. And I can go on and on. You know the scriptures, you know the words, you know the things that apply for your life change. So live according to what it is that you know, and of course you'll prosper in the areas in which you seek to prosper. So then we are told that the devil took him to a holy place, a very high temple. And he said, listen, if you be the Son of God, cast yourself off of this temple, because we're told that God would send his angels and they will make sure that not even your feet strike the ground. So basically, the angels will catch you before you fall. So how does this apply to us? If you say that this law of attraction stuff, this manifestation, this law of assumption stuff works, prove it. Show me that this stuff works. If you can show me that this stuff works in your life, then I'll believe it. You're being tempted. You are to live out the principles, but you can't live them out for somebody else. You got to discover as a creator what works for you. See, this is talking about service. You know, somebody had wrote a post the other day and she was frustrated because she's a giver. You know, and as I told her, you know, I've also occupied the spirit of enabling. And so as an enabler, we want to pour out. We want to give. And sometimes what we find is that it's not always reciprocated. So we give, but it's not given back to us. And so you don't give for that reason, though. You give because it's your nature to give. And for those that I find that can't appreciate my gifts, then I cease to give gifts to them because they can't receive it. And there's a scripture that says, don't cast your pearls before swine, because they'll turn and trample them and then turn on you. Many of us are trying to give these principles to people who are not ready. And so when you're trying to give these truths, when you're trying to tell people how thoughts create things, that if they simply begin to change their thinking, that their world will begin to change. Nobody wants to hear that if they've not found themselves in a place of empowerment or taking responsibility. Because, see, now you're putting the responsibility on me. Not the government, not my political party, not my religion, not society, not my family, not my spouse, not, you know, somebody outside of me is the fault for the life that I'm living. And when you say that as you think you are, be it unto you according to your faith, thoughts create things, you're making me responsible. And I'm not ready to hear that. I like to continue to blame somebody outside of me. So we get into that spirit of self-sacrifice. And we just say, well, listen, just if you could just, you know, believe what it is that I'm saying, I can just show it to you, you know, whatever. And so we call ourselves casting ourselves off the temple because we want to prove to people that this stuff works. And then the moment that we're trying to prove it, everything seems like it falls apart. Now, many of us are successful in proving it, as Neville did over and over and over again. And they came back with the conclusion was that would have happened anyway. So it's one of those scenarios, you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't. You have to begin living these principles for yourself. If you're a giver, you give because it's something that you want to do, but not because you're expecting that it to be reciprocated. Because what I will tell you is that the gift that you're giving will be reciprocated. Scripture says, give and it shall be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will people pour in your lap, your bosom. So, but it may not come from the person that you blessed, the person that you're giving to. And like I said, if I find myself giving and those that I'm giving to can't receive, then I cease to give to them, and I seek out those who can receive the gift that I'm giving. Each person has to do them, but you're the creators of your world, and as you think, you are. But don't get into the spirit that I have to sacrifice myself, as it were, for people to understand that this stuff works. Self-sacrifice is not what you've been called to. And even as, the devil, so-called, said to Jesus, cast yourself off of this high temple and God will give his angels charge of you. And like people will tempt you, well, if this stuff works, then prove it. Manifest $1 million tomorrow. And then you're all frustrated. You're like, manifest, $1 million, tomorrow. I see $1 million coming into my life tomorrow. You wake up and there's no $1 million. Divine within, Jesus says, do not put the divine within you to the test. You don't have to test God. God's seeking your best. He's seeking to live his best life through you. But when you're trying to test, you're saying in essence that you don't believe. So of course, because you're operating from a place of disbelief, your seemingly manifestation is delayed. It's not really delayed, it's actually on time. Everything comes in its appointed time. But it's not by a force of will, it's just by you occupying the state and allowing Father, Spirit, Source to bring about the bridge of incident to manifest that thing. And the truth of the matter is, anybody's watching you for a period of time, they're going to see your manifestations. They're going to see your lifestyle. And that's what happened with me over years of professing and talking about scriptures to my family, who, when I started out, many were unbelieving. They came into a knowledge of God for themselves after witnessing my life and the continual flow of goodness that was flowing in and out of my life. And likewise with you, Creator, don't try to impress people with the manifestation tools and the promise and things like that. Just do you. Do you to the highest level. Whether you realize it or not, your children, your siblings, your parents, your loved one, your spouse, they're watching. And they see the manifestations. So you don't have to go about, and if you're seeing for them better, you don't have to profess to them, oh, I'm seeing for you better and it's about ready to come. Don't do that. Just see it. And I'll give you a brief testimonial. Years ago, I had a roommate. He and I were friends, and so I was in California at the time, and he said, listen, you're welcome to come and stay with me, and we can just kind of split the cost, whatever. Anyway, he had a girlfriend. She was a very nice young lady. And so she told me about her aunt who had cancer. And I didn't say anything. I just, inquired what her name was, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. But I started seeing her aunt feel better. And I left it at that. I just left it. Neville says, when you give birth, when you expel that seed, as it were, you don't keep trying to reproduce the process. You just release it and let it go. So anyway, the seed was released, and the young lady came back to me, several weeks later, and I actually had forgot about our conversation. And she said, had you been praying for my aunt? And I said, well, why would you ask that? And she says, she's really started feeling better. Now, what I'm not saying is that I cured her of cancer or anything like that. It may have just been a momentary thing where she was feeling better, but she came back and gave me the testimonial that her aunt was feeling better, and she acknowledged that I had basically prayed for her, which I had. And my prayer was seeing her aunt feeling better, because at the time we spoke, she wasn't really doing well, and I just wanted to encourage her. So my whole point in that is, you don't have to tell anybody what it is that you do. You don't have to profess it, off the housetops, because what they are doing is watching you anyway. And we can, of course, tell people what it is that we believe. And many people are going to say, like they told Neville, that he said he was hallucinating. He said the man couldn't even spell hallucination. But they're going to downplay what it is that you're doing. You can't focus on that. you live your best life, and they'll watch, and some will come along later and say, listen, I want to know a little bit more about that. Or can you see for me a better experience? Can you see for me better health? Can you see for me, more money? Whatever. Because now they know that there's something in you worth emulating. So that's the second temptation. Now we're going to go to the last temptation of Jesus. So lastly, the devil came to him. He took him to a very high mountain, and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the splendor. And he said, I'll give you this if you bow down and worship me. And Jesus said to him he said, get thee away from me, Satan, because it is given that you should worship the Lord your God and worship him only. I'm letting that sink in for some of you. Listen, money's wonderful. Relationships are wonderful. Better health is wonderful. But it's even more wonderful when you discover the divine within you, God in you. So when we profess that we're God's, what we're really saying is that we're sons and daughters of the Most High God, that we're connected with this life force we know as God. We're told that in him we live, we breathe, we have our existence. And apart from him, we can do nothing. Jesus even himself acknowledged, apart from the Father, I can't do anything. And it's so true. You can notice, I recently went to a funeral of a loved one recently. And what you notice at a funeral is that the body that you're observing isn't the person that you knew. Life force, God's Spirit, has been removed, and they've translated to another place, another state. And you know that that's not your loved one anymore. This beautiful earth suit that we call a body, this vehicle of travel, is an organic car of sort. It's a vehicle that we move from point A to point B. It's a vehicle of travel for your spirit. It's not who you are. Now, I know that many of us identify with this body as being who we are, but you in your essence are truly God force, God spirit, individuated as you. Now, you're not the only God force. Each and every person that you encounter is a part of that same God force occupying the Spirit of God. God is so vast that it takes presently about 8 billion people for him to express himself through. And God loves each and every one of these experiences he calls you. Now, with that being said, when you begin focusing your attention on the without, on the distress, on your bills, on the bad relationship, all of that becomes the thing that you're worshiping or focusing on. And as the divine I am, Jesus within says, you should worship the Lord and him only, the divine within you. You don't have to look with outside yourself to another creator. You can make more money. You can have a loving relationship. You can have better health. But you start with I am. Moses told us that the name of God was I am. And they said, well, Moses, who sent you, on whose authority that you're coming? And he says, I am sent me. People didn't get it so much so that when he was in the wilderness, they were saying, Moses is doing all this stuff, we need to rebel and start our own clan. And so the Spirit of God came down and, he started striking people with leprosy and so forth. What was the name of the God that was striking people down? It was I am. It was the God within Moses, like the God within you. You strike down the perceived obstacles in your life by acknowledging the opposite. You begin walking in your abundance. And I want to share something that many people probably never realize with the temptations of Jesus. Bible says, let no one say that when he or she is tempted, that they're tempted of God, but that each person is tempted by their own desires. We see Jesus as this person that, couldn't be at least tempted in an area. But in this story, like you, he was tempted in the lust of the body, feed himself. The lust of the mind, to get into a place of service, self-sacrifice. I'm just going to do this for Jesus, And so, but then you say, well, I'm doing all this and nobody's really appreciating me. First and foremost, do it for the God within you. When you're looking at feeding yourself, when you're looking at your desires, first and foremost, have a desire for a loving relationship within you. And lastly, the lust of, I'm saintly, I'm spiritual, I'm only of this clan, I'm only of that clan. These are the clans of religion, that Neville tried to get us away. He said, down with the blue bloods, church protocol. But as I've stated often, we've made Neville a new church protocol and we don't see it, but that wasn't his goal. His goal was for you, even as scriptures go for you, is to discover the divine within you. It says, do you not know that you should worship the Lord your God? I like to say the Lord is the law of right decree. What is it that you're decreeing moment by moment? What is it that you're saying to yourself moment by moment, creators? Because what it is that you're saying to yourself, about yourself, with feelings moment by moment, is what it is that you're manifesting in your life. If the trees in your life, the fruit from the trees in your life, is not bearing the appropriate fruit, your desired fruit, look to your thoughts, creator. And that's hard for many of us because many times at a surface level, we say, I'm thinking all the right thoughts. I'm meditating at least a minute before I go to bed. Now, the rest of the day we're thinking negative, but we think that revisioning or getting into that state akin to sleep and seeing our vision at that moment, discounting all the 23 hours of negativity that we've been basking in, that's going to be enough. And we're wondering why we're not bringing about our manifestation, because we're focusing on the wrong gods. We're focusing on the gods without us instead of the God within. So as we begin to discover the divine within and we begin to walk in I am, and when we take responsibility for our lives, for our words, for our thoughts, our actions, and own them. If they're not bringing about at this moment the thing that we desire, change them. It's given to you to change. I'm not saying it's easy, especially if we've occupied the state that we've been in for, a number of years. But it's necessary if you want desired change. So as we're closing, like I said, if we're looking at the story of Jesus, Jesus could only be tempted by something that was in him, just like we can only be tempted by something that's in us. For a person that's, not interested in money, you can't say, well, I'm going to teach you how to make $1 million. They can care less about $1 million because they're focused on, let's say, their creativity. For the person that's focused on money, for example, you say, well, I'm going to show you how to be more creative. They can care less about being more creative because their focus is, how can I make more money? You do you and what appeals to you. This is no one else's journey but your journey. But as you're tempted to look on the world without, because that was Jesus' experience in the world, he was looking on the world without instead of the world within. He temporarily got distracted. And in talking about the devil, I like to say the devil is distorted, erroneous views and limitation. When we start thinking about a devil, what we say now is that there's two gods. And as Neville said, pretty soon if you got two gods, then you got four gods. Then if you got four gods, you got 8 gods, 16, 32, 64, and I can go on. My whole point is, there's only God. And a long time ago, I gave up on the concept of a devil, and I took personal ownership and responsibility. Now, early on in my life, I was indoctrinated by church protocol, church religion. And I didn't realize the devil that was doing the thinking was me. And nobody wants to own that they're the devil. It's easier to give the credit over to a persona called the devil, as opposed to us taking personal responsibility of bad thinking or error thinking or unhealthy thinking. But when we begin to take responsibility for unhealthy thinking, or not giving it over to a nemesis, but taking ownership, if I'm the only God, and if I'm connected with God Father, there's only God. So I'm given to choose what it is that I think about. It's easier for me to give the responsibility over to an entity outside of myself, and in doing so, relieve myself of responsibility. But if I'm not responsible, then I'm not empowered. I can't walk in dominion if somebody else has my power. But when I say, you know what, why did I think that thought? And I would often say as a kid, I initially thought that if I thought a thought, that I had to own that thought. And we have a whole world of people that believe that this is the case. Just because a thought comes to you, you don't have to own that thought. Some thoughts come to you like, that was ridiculous. Now, that same thought could go to somebody else, and all of a sudden, they're doing something crazy, and you're seeing them on the news. Because they thought, because they had that thought, that they had to own that thought. Understand that you're bombarded with literally millions, billions, trillions of thoughts. And it's only those thoughts that we give our attention to that we begin to manifest in our life. A lot of thoughts come to us, we don't even give a second thought to them because they don't move us. But if a thought that's inappropriate or something that you don't want to manifest in your life comes to you, immediately cast it down like, where the heck did that come from? Think on what it is that you desire, and you repeat the process. You do this long enough, that thought is going to die from a lack of attention. But if you give that thought attention, it's going to start to grow like a weed. And pretty soon, it's going to engulf your life. And sometimes we say, well, I'm possessed, I got these demons. No, you just need to start thinking right. And nobody wants to own that. But if you realize the devil that you're dealing with is you, that devil's going to go away, because now you'll start thinking like God. So my goal is not to preach to you and anything like that, but what I'm just saying is we're given to choose our next thought, good, bad, or indifferent. But what Divine Father within, Mother, God, Source, Energy within says is yes. All the promises of Christ are yes. God can't say no to us, even if our request is something negative, if something wrong, in our own eyes. If that's the thing that you're giving your attention to, it says, in Him we live, we move, we have our existence. And apart from Him, we can do nothing. So that means everything. He says, do you not know that I heal, I kill, I make alive? How does He do this? He does it through us. And apart from us, He can't do what He needs to do, because God is spirit. Now, for some people, they're going to be like, what is God? Decole saying God can't. God is spirit. Jesus said that Father is spirit, God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. Spirit does not occupy a body, except now that He's occupying the bodies of 8 billion people. So He comes clothed as us. This is how God works. God occupies us. We can call God whatever we want. We can call Him devil, Lucifer, whatever. It's still the same life force. There's only God. No matter what you call that entity, there's only God. And if you realize that you're utilizing, exercising, implementing that God power, you become all powerful. This is Coach Nicole, so have a great and abundant day.